Right. Thank you everyone for coming to tonight's edition of the Personal Preserve Program, Insecticides, Pesticides, oh my! Olivia Marshall joining us from Full Bloom Farm, and she's going to share some of the knowledge and expertise that she's been digging into about neonicotinoids and how to avoid them in your garden. So I'm going to pass it over to Olivia. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone on the call. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get my presentation up. Okay. Okay. So give me one other second so I can grab my notes over here. Okay, neonicotinoids, or neonics for short, pollinators in your garden. What to consider when buying plants and seeds for a pollinator-friendly garden. So I can probably skip a little bit of this introduction, but my name is Olivia, and I, along with my parents, Liz and Mark Marshall, and my partner, Roger, run Full Bloom Farm at the corner of Centerview and Tuttle. And the farm started in earnest in 2001 when my mom wanted to grow rare peonies organically. And since then, we've grown it into a diversified farm where we not only grow peonies organically, but also lots of veggies, fruits, and other types of flowers for our flower CSA and our farm stand customers. So that's a little bit about me and where I'm coming from, and I'll share some more background to give some more context about why we chose this specific topic for this happy hour. So a little story. Earlier this year, I was doing research on potentially getting some of our flower starts grown out for us, or plugs as they're called, and particularly Lisianthus, which is this really pretty flower pictured here. Lisianthus is notorious for taking a really long time. It's normally started in December and doesn't bloom until late July or August. So that's a lot of time under grow lights, roughly 6 months. So, and then for your reference, we don't usually buy any starts. We start everything from seed on the farm. And the earliest that we like to start seeds is late February or early March. So even though starting your own seeds can be more economical, many flower growers actually do buy plugs to save time and labor, because starting seeds is a lot of work and you have to have a really robust setup for even germination. So when a grower buys plugs, they know that like 95% of the plants are just going to work and they're going to be viable for each variety. So there's a real incentive to buy plugs. All this to say that that's why I was interested in getting plugs, because starting a few seeds is pretty straightforward, but trying to juggle like 50 different varieties of flowers can get overwhelming. So I ordered these plugs from a reputable source, and I felt sort of instant relief knowing that I was about to get a bunch of beautiful Lisianthus plugs delivered right to my door. And then I discovered really shortly after I had actually placed my order, which is sort of serendipitous, an interview between a few flower farmers and a researcher from Xerces, the Society for Invertebrate Conservation. And they were discussing the use of neonicotinoids in nursery started plants, particularly plugs. And I had some familiarity with neonics, but because we farm organically and we only use organic seeds, I hadn't really understood how prevalent neonics are in the nursery industry. And to be honest, even in our food system. I also tend to just buy mostly organic food. So what I discovered was pretty eye-opening, and I thought it would be good information to share with this group, especially as you all start visiting nurseries and nurseries are starting to open and you're looking for plants to put into your garden. And I actually ended up canceling that plug order after the nursery was not able to confirm if my plugs had been treated or not. And also, I am not an expert in this field, but there are a lot of excellent resources available online that I will try to share after this. But I want to give a special highlight to Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. They have tons of information on their website, and I have learned a lot from reading their research and listening to their webinars. So I highly recommend them. So with that, let's dive in. We all know that insect decline is a serious threat and that pollinators are essential to life on Earth. As an aside, we had someone out from the farm, or from Linden to the farm last year, and she told me that they just don't have bees anymore, and that she was astounded by how many bees and pollinators she saw on the island and on the farm. She said that she hasn't heard a bee in so long, which was kind of heartbreaking. And it also really surprised me and made me even more sort of determined about protecting pollinators on Lummi Island. So according to Xerces, there are 4 major factors for insect declines globally. It's habitat loss, climate change, disease and invasive species, pesticides, and pollution. And there are at least 73 studies that point to these 4 factors, and pesticides are the most commonly cited in all of these studies as having the largest impact on insect declines. So as you know, when you take the Personal Preserve Pledge, you agree only to use organic pesticides. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean that pesticides are not already on the plants that you may be bringing home into your garden. And I'll get into that in a second. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit just about pesticides in general. So what is a pesticide? A lot of people think of a pesticide as something that you just like spray on a plant to get rid of an insect, but pesticides are really an umbrella term for something that is used to kill any pest, whether those pests are insects, weeds, rodents, fungus, etc. Today we're going to talk about a specific class of insecticide, but the impacts of all of these pesticides are really important to consider. For example, an herbicide that's designed to kill dandelions is going to directly affect the forage of a bee, but it's not necessarily an insecticide. So anyway, now that we know what a pesticide is, let's just take a look at how insecticides work. So this is a simplified example of how insecticides work, obviously, but chemicals used to deter and directly kill insects have lots of different ways of coming into contact with the target or, non-target insect. It can be super complicated, but we'll just be focusing on a certain class of insecticide that actually becomes located within the plant itself. And that is what is called a systemic insecticide. So how does this happen? How does that get inside of the plant? There are a lot of different ways that systemic insecticides make their way into the plant. They can be applied as a foliar spray, but they can also be applied as a seed treatment. Like almost all conventional corn grown in the US is treated with neonicotinoids, and 50% of soy, and the list goes on from there. Chemigation, which is essentially just irrigation supplement, soil granules, or soil drenches. So once a systemic insecticide is applied in any of these different ways, it's taken up by the plant's vascular system and translocated into the plant tissue, meaning that the plant itself becomes toxic to the insects that are feeding on it. And this could be target insects or eating the leaves, or non-target beneficial insects like bees trying to eat the pollen. So what are neonicotinoids? We're sort of going layer by layer by layer at this point, but we're getting there, right? Neonics, for short, might be easier too, are a class of neuroactive systemic insecticides and are now the most widely used insecticide in the world and the most studied class of insecticides for bees. So beyond the use of neonics on flowering plants, as I mentioned before, they are used on many different food crops. And as I mentioned, I said 95% of conventional corn, 50% of conventional soy, and it's also canola, wheat, sugar beet, cotton, etc. They were developed in the 90s in response to pest resistance to other insecticides and are really, really, really effective at killing several types of insects, specifically like the sap sucking type, or like aphids, or chewing, like beetles, whiteflies, etc. And they feed on the plant tissue. And they are, what I mean, I don't know if I already said this, but they're very prevalent. Yeah, I did say that. And what I mean by prevalent, or sorry, persistent, excuse me, I meant to say persistent, is that neonics can persist in the soil for years after they've been applied. It kind of depends on the according to the research, it depends on the application of it. But, seed coatings versus soil drenches might have different half-lives, but in general, it stays in the soil. And even plants that are not treated with neonics, but are planted near a plant that's treated with neonics will take up the neonic. So that's what I mean by persistent. It's just like it's in the soil and it's really hard to get rid of it. And that sort of a plant taking up another pesticide, that's what we call pesticide drift. I think a lot of people think of that as in terms of like dust or spray, which does also happen with neonics, like with neonic coated seeds. But this is just another sort of other way that happens that I don't think people are super aware of. Okay, so what's the risk of neonics to pollinators? I'm not going to go into too many gruesome details, but I think it's important to explain how neonics actually work, because it's really important. So they bind to the nerve receptors in insects, and they sort of overwhelm the nervous system, which essentially leads to paralysis and then death. For non-target insects like bees, if it doesn't kill them outright, it can cause them to have really major issues with their central clock and their circadian rhythms. And if you know bees, that's sort of their clock is what allows them to sort of coincide their activity with floral resources and like good flight weather, essentially. And also to know, like when it's dark and when it's not good to go out and forage. And so neonics directly impact their ability to figure out what's going on in the world in that way. And obviously impacts learning and navigation and general communication. So this image here that I found is from a study where on how imidacloprid, which is it's a type of neonic, disrupts bumblebee foraging rhythms and sleep. So bumblebees like us sleep at night. They go out and they eat all day long, and then night they come home and they go to bed. And that's what you see there on the left, all that blue activity of them foraging during the day, and it's really low on the right when they're sleeping. But in the field that was treated with imidacloprid, you can see that you can see the confusion, right, that happened there. The bee was out at night, it looks like, foraging and maybe sleeping during the day and not foraging as much as it should have been, which, you know, that contributes to just general colony health and their ability to feed themselves and the hive. So neonics also have been shown to significantly reduce queen production, which obviously would contribute to lower bee populations overall. And it causes brood to develop slower and have higher rates of mortality. And it's also been linked with colony collapse disorder. So there are a lot of reasons why this pesticide is concerning. So what can you do? There's actually a lot. You can plant pollinator-friendly garden, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. But just make sure that the plants that you're planting haven't been treated with neonics. You can advocate for regulation. So right now there's no regulation or requirement that retailers, for example, have to label products that have been treated with neonics, and the EPA has left that completely up to retailers to decide. Friends of the Earth, in conjunction with Nurseries, I don't know, some of you may have heard this already, but they bought plants from Nurseries, I think back in 2018, and tested them. They're it's one of the only studies that they did on actual nursery plants, and they found that 50% of all plants had been treated with neonics. But Friends of the Earth ended up leading a successful campaign to push retailers to eliminate neonics, and there has been a really significant change in the use of neonics. I wasn't able to confirm if Lowe's and Home Depot don't use neonics. I got kind of weird answers when I called, and I couldn't find great information on their website. So, but there's a lot of press out there that says they're trying to phase it out. So that's as far as I was able to get with that. But this all really came about because of consumer education and pressure. People started asking about neonics, you know, and asking their cities to not use neonics in parks or on roadsides and things like that. So the other thing you can do is educate yourself. So let's educate ourselves. There are so many resources available online, but like I said earlier, I would really start with Nurseries because I just think they're fabulous and they have so many different kinds of resources on their website. And then finally, ask your nursery where they stand, but beware of non-answers. So something that's a little tricky with this is I reached out to the retailer that I had ordered the Lisianthus from and asked if they had been treated with neonicotinoids. And I got the response, we don't spray with neonics. So then I followed up and I asked if neonics had ever been applied throughout the life cycle of the plant. And if so, I would unfortunately need to cancel my order. And to that, I got the response, I spoke with a horticulture team and they recommend you cancel your order. So that just goes to show you that the plant supply chain is huge. Like it's super complicated and global, and there are plants coming from all over the world. And most nurseries don't grow their own plants, right? Most nurseries buy from wholesalers, and those wholesalers grow them, or the wholesalers buy them from somewhere else and grow them and then send them again and sell them again. So it's really important that your nursery knows where things are coming from and what the supplier of their starts is doing with them. And I think that if they are not explicitly sourcing neonic-free plants and seeds, it's very possible that they have been treated. But you should still ask, because usually, in my experience, people at nurseries are very helpful and want to answer your questions. So speaking of, here are some questions to ask your nursery. This is a little nursery card from the Northwest Center for Alternative to Pesticides. And this is really great. It's concise and has a little reminder about what neonicotinoids are and the questions to ask. And I just want to run through these really quickly. So 1, are your plants or seeds treated with neonicotinoids? Do you know which of your suppliers use them? This is a really important question because when I was doing my research to put together a list for this group of Bellingham nurseries or Whatcom County nurseries that didn't use neonics, I had to ask a couple times about where do you get your starts? Do you know if they don't use neonicotinoids? And some of them were pretty sure, but kind of thought, okay, there's maybe a handful that I'm not sure about. And in those cases, everyone that I spoke to said that they would be happy to call the supplier and ask them directly, and it wouldn't be any problem at all. So I want to encourage people to not feel afraid of asking this question or feeling like it's contentious or something. It just, people are used to the question and they want to be helpful. And then the third one is, would you consider removing neonicotinoid applications and treated plants from your shelves? And this is more of a question to figure out what their plans are and where they stand. And then I put together just a couple resources. Like I said, Nurseries is not on here. I should probably add that, but these are lists, specific lists of neonic free nurseries, and not just these are national. So there's also a lot of online resources. So if you can't find a specific plant locally for some reason and you don't want to wait to order it, there are a lot of online nurseries that are great too. And then this is just a quick rundown of what happened when I called a few nurseries in town. This is obviously not an exhaustive list, but kind of hits the high notes. And if you have a nursery that you know of that doesn't use neonics, I'd love to know and I can add it to the list. So the first 2 said absolutely not. And then the next 3 were said most of our suppliers don't use neonics. So it would be more of like if you have a specific plant that you're interested in and you're not sure, they can look at the supplier and they can tell you whether or not they use neonics. But the first 2 ones seem to have a no neonic policy, basically. And then Joe's Garden didn't know what neonics were, but they don't use pesticides. And then Home Depot and Lowe's Garden Center. Apparently Home Depot is 98% neonic free. And Lowe's Garden Center, I couldn't figure it out. There's a lot of sort of like news articles and things like that saying that they're working on it or they're encouraging their suppliers, but I couldn't find anything on the website that specifically said that. So that's that. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Well, I have a question. Does Joe's Garden grow everything? I mean, they're obviously ordering seeds. Maybe they order plugs. So the fact that they don't use them doesn't mean much, does it?
What was where are you talking about?
Well, Joe's Garden. The fact that, I mean, they don't save all their own seed, or I'm sure that they have to order seeds. Maybe they order some plugs. I don't know.
Yes. The person I spoke to was not very direct. So I think it's a good example of, you can keep pressing someone on it and asking them. And you just have to decide if that's the answer that you're most comfortable with too, at the end of the day.
I have
Yes.
a question.
Does this apply to tree plugs too? Like when we buy trees from the conservation district?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So
I mean, I kind of doubt that they do, but it's actually, some states require it. Actually, some states require things be sprayed or injected with neonics. I don't think Washington is one. But I honestly didn't research that.
why would they require being sprayed with it?
Yeah, so like certain places like Florida where they have issues with the orange tree, they don't want anything to get out of hand, and their solution for that is to spray everything with neonics, I guess.
So we just planted 400 trees at the Curry Preserve. How can we know whether or not there were neonics in those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would call them and just ask.
Hmm.
I don't know if I didn't call them. I just did retail, like retail outlets, as opposed to sort of wholesale-y type. But usually when they treat trees, it's either injected into the trunk or the root system or soil drench. So it's possible it could be. I would find that really surprising, a conservation district to use neonics, but I don't know, to be honest. It's definitely something that we should look into.
Yeah.
Like, so there's like the individual conservation districts kind of by county, and then there's like a master warehouse where all the conservation district plants come from, and then that on that like ordering sheet, it has like the different locations of where like plugs are coming from and trees are coming from. So I think that you could call the conservation district and ask about the supplier, and I think they'd be pretty quick to be able to tell you who it is and whether or not.
Yeah, there is a very big wholesale nursery in Skagit that I believe supplies a lot of the conservation districts, and they are neonic free. So, but I don't know if that's the specific place that those trees came from.
Yeah, I used to work at a nursery in town called Cascade Cuts. That's a wholesale
Oh yeah,
nursery, and
them
they like provide to a bunch of nurseries in town. And I always thought it was really interesting that like all of the practice there is like an organic practice, but the process in order to be like certified organic, you have to go through so many hoops. So they do, it's like all an organic process, and they're like pesticide free, but it's all like it's not labeled as such because of the hoops to jump through for that. So it's
yeah.
kind of interesting that, like thinking about the local places and like their practices and what they do and how they can go about stuff. I don't know if I'm making any sense right now.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on money, because when I called the local nurseries were one I could talk to somebody. I could at like Home Depot or Lowe's. I wasn't getting through. I was just like on hold or got transferred multiple times. I could have gone in, but I don't know that I would, if I had gone in, that I would have talked to somebody who knew. But all the local places I called, they really tried to answer my question and honestly, be as honest as possible about how they source. They told me who they source from. So I definitely recommend, going local, and also looking online and just doing research on, there are a lot of really great nurseries online where you can at least do some research and find plants that you want and request from the local nursery or things like that.
Olivia, this might be a silly question, but Can we assume for the most part, well, I'm thinking of Joe's Garden, so maybe not. If we're buying something organic, it's not necessarily neonic free then. from
Yeah,
what
it
I
is.
heard from you.
It is neonic free for sure. Yeah. Neonicotinoids are not allowed in organic farming. So if you buy an organic start from Joe's Garden, then they shouldn't be using neonicotinoids.
Anywhere along the line.
Anywhere, yeah, that start should not be.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that everything Joe's does is organic. Yeah.
Right.
I personally really like Sunseed starts. And they are, I mean, they're sold at like the co-op. They also sell them at My Garden Nursery on Bakerview. They're great,
Okay.
and they are organic, and they are local too. Yeah. For veggies, I don't know. I don't think I've purchased flower starts from them before.
I never really thought about flowers so much being organic or being neonic free. So this is really helpful. I really appreciate
Yeah.
all the research you did. And letting
Yeah,
us
you're
know about
welcome.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, I just recently started researching bulbs because but I've got all of these tulips that we've planted, and our bulbs come from the Netherlands, and neonics are banned in the EU. So there are no neonics on any of the bulbs. So that's something to think about too, if you're getting bulbs from somewhere local here, which I haven't yet, but that's worth looking into, asking them. I haven't asked that yet.
In your research with this so far, Olivia, have you found that like particular like species are more likely to be treated with neonicotinoids, or is it just kind of a blanket across, or is it like, oh, like it's really common on these type of flowers, or it's really common on tomatoes, or like something like like along those lines, or
Yeah. Well, I mean, for example, it's the corn example, I think, is really good. It's just in all conventional corn. That's how I look at it. And but I think the problem with saying, oh, it's probably on this and it's probably not on that, is that it's such a effective pesticide for so many pests that feed on tomatoes or lettuce or peas, or all of these things that I don't know the answer to that 100%. But I know that it is kind of part of like a cocktail for flower plugs if you're buying them from a big grow source, which we don't.
anyone have any other questions or comments, stories, anything else to share?
Well, I just hope I haven't already poisoned my property.
Well, that's a good point. I think the one thing I was reading, because I thought about that, I thought, oh man, what if there was something
Yeah.
we unintentionally planted? I don't know what it would have been, but if you do know, or if you find out after the fact that did get treated with neonics and you don't want to dig it up, it's recommended that you net the flower for the first year so that no pollinators can access it. So that, I think that's kind of like your only solution. There.
But plants that have been in for a long time.
I don't really, that it sounds like it can, they've been there. It sounds like that after a year, like after the first year, the flowers are okay.
Mm,
But I don't really know what that's based on exactly.
yeah,
But
yeah.
you would, I mean, the pesticide has to go somewhere. So it's either in the soil or, I mean, the neonicotinoids are water soluble. So there's also some concern around aquatic amphibian life and what it's doing to those ecosystems, which frankly, I don't think are being studied. So yeah, I would just avoid it at all costs. But the good news is that there's a lot of awareness now around this class of pesticide or insecticide. And so nurseries and growers are getting used to hearing this and needing to have an answer for where their starts come from and having more transparency. And I think it would be great if neonics were just banned like they are in the EU. And people should and can advocate for that. I moved up here from Berkeley, and the city of Berkeley in California, their state or the city parks are run organically. Like they don't use any pesticides or herbicides or anything like that unless it's organic certified. And that's something that the people in Berkeley wanted to have happen, similar to what happened here in the 80s with, not having glyphosate sprayed on the side of the roads. You all know about that, right? Yeah. I think we're like, what's that?
On Lummi Island.
On Lummi Island, yeah.
Libby, I had one question, and I don't know that you would know the answer, but these things are, obviously deadly to insects, but they're used broadly on food products that a lot of people consume. Are there studies on the effects of neonics on humans?
Probably. I didn't look into that as much. I think that they're starting to, because, the reason why they switched from whatever they were using before to neonics is because before that pesticide was a lot more toxic to humans, and neonics are less toxic to humans.
So they have done, apparently they've done studies, but you look at the prevalence.
Right.
You look at the prevalence of things like Parkinson's disease and other neurological degenerative diseases, and you kind of wonder.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, the other thing that I heard in this interview with this Xerces researcher is that, and I knew this already, but just the way she explained it was a good reminder, that these pesticides are studied by the producers. That is who study, they're the ones who run the studies. And there really weren't any studies that the suppliers or the non-suppliers had done of neonicotinoids until Friends of the Earth and Xerces pulled all of those plants in 2018 from like big box stores and tested them. And they were like, these are full of neonics. And when the producers test these things, they use one kind of bee. They don't test it on multiple pollinators or, and see the effects. They use one kind of bee, and they use a very, very specific application rate. So, which is, how a study should be done, I guess, but you'd want it to be done on multiple pollinators. If you can't really make a claim that it doesn't affect pollinators if it doesn't affect only one. So that comes down to regulation though, right? Is having the EPA do more studies on this. And they are starting to, there's more pressure, but still not enough. I mean, now Friends of the Earth is pushing food retailers to sign on to eliminating neonics from their supply chain. So that would involve a lot of food that they currently carry. But some retailers are actually stepping up, which is good news. Does anyone, has anyone already purchased plants or is getting ready or have ideas about what they want to plant in their gardens this year? Yeah.
Just put my potatoes in.
Oh, nice. That's good. I'm wondering when we're even getting, where we ordered ours. I wonder where they are.
They just arrived a few days ago, so I had
Okay.
the pressure's on. I gotta go deal with that.
Nice.
Yeah.
We've purchased seeds.
Nice. Like veggie seeds or
Yeah,
flower
veggie seeds. Veggie
Nice.
seeds. So I'm gonna have to check and see if they have
Yeah.
neonicotinoids in them.
Yep.
I was in town yesterday and got a few plants at the garden spot, and one of them I noticed like in the tag that it came like from the producer. It said on there like not treated with neonicotinoids and like had it like in big letters, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, you know, as I'm shopping around, I can just like look at the
That's
tag.
great.
It'd be nice
Yeah.
if like they all did that. But
Mhm.
see that. And it was, I wish I could remember the name of the company, but it was one that I see a lot. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, well, cool. Maybe it's all their plants. But
Yeah, it probably is. There are two really big, and I don't, let me see if I.
I want to say it was like Monrovia.
That's a big one.
Oh, it's a big
Yeah.
one.
Monrovia does not use neonics.
Okay.
Okay.
Skagit Garden is the big supplier that my garden spot gets a lot of their stuff from. Or not my garden spot, my garden nursery. And Blooming Advantage. And both of those wholesalers do not use neonics. Or source like from Monrovia, for example, who also is neonic free. Any other questions? Oh, yep.
This isn't a question, but it's a comment. I really, really appreciate this. This is something that I haven't been very much aware of. And I thought I knew something about organic things, seeds and stuff like that. You know, when I grew up in central Minnesota back in the 50s, you know, we saved our seeds from year to year. And we had a huge garden. I grew up in the woods and rural area. And we always saved seeds. And this was before Monsanto started forcing farmers to, you know, to not do that. So it's been very informative. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you, Katie, for getting her.
Oh, yeah, I had to really twist Olivia's arm. But no, this has been great, Olivia. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and for
thank you.
You know, like doing all the legwork of talking to some of the local retailers and whatnot, so that people know where they can go. And that's a great list that you've compiled and a really awesome resource for everyone.
Absolutely, happy to.
Hey, Katie, I think in the next tidings, you should put something in there about Olivia and this wonderful program, and for people who have there aren't enough people watching it, that they should go to the recording.
Yes.
So that more people get all this wonderful information.
Yeah, this was great.
Thank
I'll
you.
definitely make sure and share it widely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great.
So, thank you.
Yeah.